So we are going to replace the brake pads, the caliper and the bracket, and the rotor. You can see the rotor is worn down, the grooves here. I can't stick my finger inside the groove that says that it's worn down and needs to be replaced. Brake pads, looking at them, they're not too bad, but the other sides are worn down, so when you replace one, you replace the other. The caliper, looking a little worn down too, so we're going to go ahead and replace that. For the caliper, you need a 12 millimeter, and for the bracket that the caliper is in, you're going to need an 18 millimeter. I would recommend using the breaker bar for the bracket, because it tends to get stuck in there quite well and you don't want to break your ratchet trying to get that off. Okay, the bolts, they are the 12 millimeter bolts, one here and one there. A little bit that way. So you want to loosen the first one just a bit and then come down and break the second one. You don't want to take off this first one because you're going to have the whole caliper moving while you're trying to unloosen the second one. Okay. There. First one. This one can be a little difficult because you got your emergency brake line in the way. Okay. Alright, typically for taking off your calipers here, you can use a big flathead screwdriver or you can use a pry bar. You just want to put it in there. Make sure you're not going into the holes of the rotor. Just slide it in there and it should pop right off. This, the reason it came off so easy is because I've already taken it off once to inspect it. So usually it's not that easy to pop them off. You want to pry here and then come underneath and pry underneath to pop off. Now, make sure that you have a hold of your caliper while you're doing that, because you don't want this to fall and tug on the brake line. If you damage the brake line, you got a lot more work to do. So you want to keep this intact because it's a hydraulic, it's a closed system. You don't want unnecessary leaks. So you want to take your caliper for now and hang it right up here on top so that way it doesn't fall. Some people like to get a hanger or some kind of piece of metal to hang it from the bolt up here. Some people like to take a hanger or string or some kind of metal, run it through here and hang it on the bolts, that way it doesn't fall. So you can see where I have it right there. It's not going to fall off unless I do some major shaking on it. So you want to keep that steady in place. And now for taking off your rear and front brake pad here on the back wheel, I like to take my flathead screwdriver, just ever so slightly stick it in there to get it loose. You want to push outward against the brake pad, not inward against the rotor. You don't want to damage the rotor. However, if you're replacing the rotor like I am, it doesn't matter. But so you can see it just pops right out, right from the bracket clamps. Same thing, just pull on it a little bit, pry it ever so gently, and it pops right out. As you can see here, these brake pads aren't very well worn. However, since the other side is completely worn down, we'll be replacing these as well. Next, we're going to take off the bracket, or the brace here. Okay, for the bracket, the two bolts are back here, these two bigger ones, the top one and the bottom one. Like I said, you need 18 millimeter, and I recommend using a breaker bar because these can get rusted or stuck in place. And like what we did with the caliper, we're going to loosen the first one, then loosen the second one. We don't want to take one off without the other because, again, when you go to try to take the other one off, the whole thing's going to shift with it. So, okay, so let's start with our top bolt. And here we go. Okay, now that I got it loose right there, let's go ahead and break the bottom one now. Let's see if this is going to be as easy as the top one was. There we go. And I like to take the bottom one off first. Then you take the top one off, it'll fall over. So take the bottom one off first, and then I work off the top one. That way I can hold the bracket while loosening it. Or I say brace, I keep calling it a bracket. I suppose you can call it one or the other. Okay, and it just comes right off. Alright, next for taking off our rotor here. Now, typically if you're going to save the rotor, you're not replacing it. What you want to do is you just want to take your hammer and gently tap on the top, bottom, and sides. What that's going to do is it's going to break this dirty, rusty grip that's right here. Otherwise you're going to have a real hard time getting it off. So you just want to hit it gently a few times just to break it loose. You can see it's already starting to move. Now, since I'm not worried about damaging the rotor because I'm replacing it, I can pound it hard from behind to get it off. However, if you're reusing your rotor, you want to tap it gently on the back just like I just did. So just start hitting on the back. There we go. And here are the new brake pads. Complete with the new metal brackets. This is the new caliper and bracket set. This is for the passenger side. Your passenger and driver sides have two different parts, so you don't want to mix the two of them up. This one is the passenger side. Now, this I'm going to be showing you when we bleed the brake system to get the air out. It'll be through this release valve right here. And then here where it attaches, you'll see on this bolt that it's hollow. The hole in the side right there, that's for the brake fluid to travel through. This is where it hooks into the brake line. So the fluid is going to travel through the bolt, supplying the fluid to your caliper. Before we hook this up to the brake line, we have to make sure that we fill up the caliper with brake fluid so that way we don't have excess air in there. So when we get to it, I want to remind you again the fact that when we swap out the caliper for the other caliper, we have to do it quickly so we're not losing a lot of fluid. That fluid there, that is what operates your hydraulics here. That pushes your brake pads onto the rotor. And here, this one is the driver's side caliper and bracket. There's your hydraulic valves in there. Around here on the front, there is your bleeder valve. And again, your bolt here to attach to the brake line for the brake fluid to flow through. And here we have our new rotors. You'll notice on the rotor here it's got some kind of oily film on the outside part of it. So what you're going to want to do use yourself a brake part cleaner. Spray it on there and wipe it off on both sides, because you do not want to have the oily film here on the face of your rotors. You don't want any kind of slippery anything in your brakes. So you leave it on there, you run the risk of the brake slipping when you press the brake to activate it, so they'll need to be cleaned off. Likewise with your brake pads here, you do not want anything greasy or oily touching the pad side of it. You want to keep that free and clear of anything like that. And same thing, we'll flip them over, give them a spray and wipe. Alright, now we're good to go. Okay, now I'm going to put our new rotor on. I'll line it up with the bolts and just slide it right on. Just like that. Go. Alright, next, for putting on the caliper, first thing we need to do is put on our brace. And it's going to go underneath here and here. Bolts will go through there. Before attach that on there though, it's recommended and not a bad idea to put on some Loctite on there. You want the Loctite Red 271. It's made for heavy duty bolts such as automotive bolts. Now you don't need to put a whole lot on, just a little dab. I'll show you. Just a little tiny bit right there like that. That's all you need. Hold up. Okay, so put the first one in just to hold it in place. It's easier to find the bottom one first. There we go. Okay. Alright, and just a little bit Loctite on the top bolt. Do you see? That's all you need. Don't put any more than that, because when you go back to work on it, it's going to be really difficult to get off. Alright. I'll just slide that right in there. Tighten it down by hand as much as you can. And then, again with your breaker bar, it is 18 millimeter. Now when you tighten these, be careful not to tighten them like Superman or Hercules, because I have broken these bolts before. You don't want to deal with a broken bolt. Went the wrong way. There, just like that. That's all it takes. Alright, now we're going to put the caliper on. Before we do that though, we need to put brake fluid into the caliper so we don't have excessive air in our line when we go and flush the air out. First thing you want to do, 10 millimeter wrench. You want to use the closed part, because with the crescent end right there, you run the risk of it slipping off. You want to stick it on there and loosen your bleed bolt. And you want to take the bleed bolt out for right now, so that way we get airflow here, because now we're going to take this small little silicone funnel that I have, put it into the hole there, and add .3 brake fluid for Ford Excursion 2001. Add a little bit at a time because it's not going to take much to fill it up. You don't want to overflow it. And you can see it coming up right there, and you can see it coming up over here. Which means we got the right amount that we need. Just perfect. So just put this on a towel here to keep that from leaking out. You don't want brake fluid going everywhere because it's poisonous. And we'll put our bleed bolt back in. And we are going to tighten it just slightly, so that way we don't get any leak while it's hanging out there. You don't want to tighten them down too hard though. Alright, now this is going to go on in place of the other caliper, but first we've got to get the other caliper off. Okay, so now to take off this caliper here, this is your brake line right here. For this you're going to need a size 15 millimeter. However, you can see how rusted on that's going to be. If you try and break it loose just sitting up here, it's going to rattle around over the place. So what you're going to want to do is take your caliper and put it back on, so that way you have something to hold it in place to work with to be able to loosen that. Okay, so you can see that I put the bolts in the top and the bottom down here. That's to hold this in place, so I can use my 15 millimeter socket to break loose the bolt for the brake line. Okay, see, once I got it loose right there, I'm starting to leak fluid already. Okay, that's all I need right there, just to get it loose. So now what I'm going to do, I want to take the rest of it off by hand and then quickly transfer the brake line to the new one, so that way I lose as the least amount of brake fluid as possible. You can see I'm starting to get leak already, so I got this positioned up here so I can get this off as quickly as possible and then bring it down and attach it to the new caliper. Oops, wrong way. Okay, now what you want is, your bolt comes with two washers. You need one washer down here, right there, This will go through it, and that washer right there. Okay. Must be pretty low on brake fluid if I'm not. This should be running. That means I'm pretty low on brake fluid. The moment you take this off, this should be pouring out. So that's a good indicator of how low of brake fluid I'm at. Okay, so now we can stick that through there. While I have it on here, can you zoom in right there? See that little hole in there? You see it? You see it?
Focus.
Won't focus. So there's a little hole just inside of the brake fluid connector. The brake fluid flows right through that hole, right into that hole there, and runs right through. Okay. We'll stick that through. Let's get our new caliper up here. Oh, doggone it. There we go. Just put this back. You can see it. Lost fluid from the caliper, turning it on its side. Didn't want to do that, but all right. Tighten down on there. Check and make sure we don't have any more drip or leakage going on, so we'll wipe it off. Take a look. Do we have anything running out? Doesn't look like it, so I think we're good. Yep. Okay. Now, next up, brake pads. Alright, before you put in the pads now, you need to put in your metal brackets here. These will hold the pins of the brake pads into place. They just slide right in just like that. Down here on the bottom, if you get a little resistance, just push on the bottom of your rotor and it'll give you the space for it to go in. Just like that. Alright, now, brake pads. When they go in, see how you got this curve right here? You want that curve to be along the curve right there. When you put it in, you just put it in kind of at an angle, just like that, on the top and bottom. Right in. There you go. Same thing in the back. Get your curve. This one, make sure that you can see back here to do it. Again, at a curve. This one's a little more difficult to put in because it's hard to see back here. Okay, and there. Like I said, the back here is a little more difficult. You're actually going to have to get your head back here and look and see. Obviously, I had a little difficulty doing that because my head would block the camera view of getting it back in there. Well, like I said, just put it in an angle, starting at the bottom and the top, and then pop it into place. Now you got your brake pads in. Next up, caliper. It's going to go right on here now. Because this is a brand new caliper, you don't have to worry about pushing your O-ring pistons back in. I do have a tool for that. I'll show you that in just a moment. So this, just going to slide right back on. Then you want to make sure that that flat part of this opening lines up with that right there. Put the first bolt in just to hold it in place. Okay. Then on the bottom, yeah, same thing again. Look down under here to make sure you got the flat part onto there. Put your bolt in. Okay, tighten that in by hand. This one, tighten in by hand too. Alright, now, previously, when we took these bolts off, the original caliper on the Pathfinder took a 12mm socket. However, with the new caliper set that I have on here, I found that it takes a 15. Now, same thing when you tighten these with the bracket. What you don't want to do is, you don't want to over tighten. So the last thing you want to do is break a bolt. I've done that before. It's not fun to get it out. There. There. Just like that. Alright. Now we got those tightened on there. Just double check this. Make sure it's tight enough because you don't want a leak coming from there. And then next is going to be bleeding out the brake lines. You don't need any kind of special tool or anything fancy. I'm going to show you how to bleed your brake lines using simple plastic hose that you can get from Home Depot or Lowe's, along with a Powerade bottle. And that's as simple as it gets. To that, I said I would show you the little tool I got. I got this from AutoZone. This is for pushing in your O-ring pistons here. All you do is take the old brake pad or a piece of metal, stick it in there across there. You can take this, the round part, put it down just like that, and then all you do is just crank the handle, and it pushes that ring right back in, just like that. Okay, something that I started doing off camera that I realized I should have done on camera for you to see. So when you got your rotor on, it's still a little loose because we have a brand new caliper on there. The hydraulic valves are not pushed out yet. You can see it's not loose anymore because I started pumping the brake pedal after I put it on there. So I stopped midway through because I realized that needs to be on camera, because that's the next step you do before you start bleeding your brake lines. Okay, under the hood, here is your master cylinder. While you're doing this process, you have your cap unfastened. Some people say to take the cap off while you're doing it. I only do that when I replace the caliper, or I'm sorry, when I replace the brake pads, and then I got to push the calipers back in. You have the cap off so that way while the calipers or pistons are being pushed back in, the air comes back out. So you just come over here, and with your hand or foot, just pump your brake pedal. See, it's still going all the way back because it's still got more to push out. So you'll pump your brakes until you get good resistance on it. Could be anywhere from 10 to 20 times. Now, before I started recording, I could push that brake pedal back easily all the way to the back without any effort or resistance. Now I'm having to push a little harder to get it down. So that's where I'd stop on it now, because we need to bleed the brake lines. If we were not bleeding those brake lines, you could pump this 10, 20, 25 times, and then your brake pedal would go back to the resistance where you don't need to push down so far to stop. But because we have air in the lines, you can see the pedal still goes all the way back. So next up, now that we've done that, is to bleed our brake lines. And now for bleeding the brakes. As I was saying before, you don't need any kind of fancy tools. You don't need an expensive mechanic. You don't need any of that. All you need is a simple Powerade bottle and a plastic tube. Plastic tube you can pick up from your local Lowe's or Home Depot. Powerade, Just go get a drink from the store. So what you want to do is, at the top here, you want to drill yourself a hole for your plastic tube to go through. You want the plastic tube to go all the way down to the bottom. And then you want to drill a second smaller hole that's an air vent hole. So that way when you get your flow of brake fluid going, you have the air release, that way the fluid flows. The other part to that is you want to have a small amount of brake fluid in here already. This brake fluid, that'll help with the suction of the brake fluid flowing through the tube. You can use new brake fluid for it, or you can do what I did since I replaced the calipers. I emptied out the old brake fluid from the old calipers into here. That's why it's that wonderful color right there. So, I'm going to explain it and then we're going to see it. First thing you're going to have is you're going to go to the underneath part and you're going to take your 10mm wrench. You're going to put that onto the bleeder bolt. You want to use the closed end, not the crescent side. Crescent side could slip. Closed end will keep that from happening. Put it on your bleeder bolt, and then you're going to attach your hose right on the top of the bleeder bolt. Pop it open just enough for the fluid to start flowing. Then you're going to have the person helping you go over and start pumping the brake pedals. When that happens, you're going to see bubbles streaming through. You want to keep pumping those the brake pedal until the bubbles stop. Once the bubble stops, that gets rid of all of the airflow through there. Once you see the bubble stop, that's when you'll close back up that bleeder bolt, pop your tube off, and tighten it up. So, that's a brief explanation of it. Now we're actually going to go and do it so that way you can see it in action. Now, as we start with bleeding our brake lines, for your 7.3 diesel as well as your Ford Power Strokes, there is a particular order or sequence that you need to bleed them in. You want to start off with the passenger rear. Next, you're going to do the driver's side rear. Third, come back around to the front. You will do the passenger front. And last, the driver's side front. That's your correct order or sequence that you need to bleed them in. That'll be down in the description below. Okay, under the hood, here is your master cylinder. While you're doing this process, you have your cap unfastened. Some people say to take the cap off while you're doing it. I only do that when I replace the caliper, or I'm sorry, when I replace the brake pads, and then I got to push the calipers back in. You have the cap off so that way while the calipers or pistons are being pushed back in, the air comes back out through here. I don't like having the cap off when I bleed the brake lines because I don't want to be taking air in during that, so just unseal and leave it set on there. Okay, rear passenger, we're going to go ahead and put our crescent wrench on with the close end first, and then we're going to bring a plastic tube on here and just put it right over the top of the bleeder bolt, just like that. And then we're going to go ahead and pop it open. Okay. You see you've got some flow started here. Alright, go ahead and start pumping the brakes. There we go. Slowly. You see that big old air bubble coming out?
Oh my god. That's what's in the brakes?
Pump it again. Keep going. Okay, you can see right there. Bubbles have stopped. Okay, go ahead and stop.
Okay.
I'm showing here. Wait, is that all the black liquid in there?
Brake fluid.
Will that take the liquid out?
Yes.
Why do you want to take the liquid out?
Okay. Alright, so you got it tightened up. Clean up any excess fluid. Go ahead and pop your hose off. You'll just hold it up so that way any excess fluid that's in here will drain in. And you can see got quite a bit of fluid out of there to get all the air out. So now make sure that you have all your excess drippage cleaned up so that way you don't get that burning smell when you start driving it again. Then we'll tighten it up. Make sure it's got a nice seal on it. There. And then go ahead and replace the bleeder cap. And passenger rear is finished. Now before we move on to the next one, after each brake that you drain or you flush, you go and check the master cylinder to make sure that you're full on fluid, because what you don't want is you don't want the fluid reservoir to go low in the master cylinder. Then you start pumping more air in, then you have to restart the whole process. So that's the next thing we're going to do right now, is check the brake fluid level in the master cylinder. So now we're going to check our levels. As you can see, bleeding it took down quite a bit of the fluid level. Where maximum fills right there, you can see the fluid level is just about down here, so that took out quite a bit. So we're just going to fill it back up again with .3 brake fluid. Alright, now we're on the rear passenger side. You can see I emptied out the bottle some so that way we don't run into any overflowing issues. So crescent wrench on here, and then go ahead and hook up our tube, and we're going to open it. Alright, and then you're going to have your person on the brake pedal. Go ahead and start pumping the brakes. Alright, go ahead. Nice and slow. You can see this side is going to do a little easier because we blew out most of the air on the other side. And we'll keep doing this, watching for the bubbles. Alright, there we go. See the bubbles stop. Alright, you can go ahead and stop pumping. Then we're going to tighten up. Just enough to make sure nothing's coming out. Then pump that loose. Hold it up to drain the rest out. And then finish tightening. There we go. Wipe off the excess. And then you want to just take a quick inspection, look at it after you're done tightening. Just to make sure that you don't have any leak or drippage going on. Once it's wiped away, you can also take a look on here, make sure you don't have any drippage going on in your connector there. And then put your bleeder cap on. Alright, and like I said, you want to go back to the master cylinder, check your fluid level and make sure that it's topped off. And then we'll move on to next, which will be the front passenger side. Alright, so with your wheels still on, it's possible to still crawl under and bleed them without having to take the wheels off. Just a little more cramped. However, with these excursions and power strokes, you got a lot of space to work with underneath. So you can see here's your bleeder cap right here, so you just need to pull your bleeder cap off. Simple as that. And put our crescent on. Then we'll put our cap on, or say our hose on. Before we start loosening it. Okay, now we can loosen it. There we go. It's going the wrong way at first. Alright, okay, go ahead and start pumping. Alright, go ahead and stop. You can see right there, that one had almost no air in it. Okay, so we'll tighten it up a bit. Got a rag here before popping that off. Alright, tighten it up. And put our bleeder cap back on. There we go. Yeah. As you see, doing it in the sequence of order right there, the air becomes less and less. I would imagine when we do the driver's side, there's going to be hardly any coming out. We'll see. Now, with barely any coming out, we don't need to check our fluid level on our master cylinder. You can if you like. However, since, like I said, barely anything came out, I'm not going to need to check it. So we'll see you over on the front driver's side. Front side, last one in sequence here. Taking care not to rip it or break it. Stick a crescent on there. Put our hose on. Now we'll loosen it. Okay, go ahead and start pumping. Alright, stop. You can see there, just a few little bubbles. Go ahead and tighten it back up. Pop it line off. Tighten it up, make sure we don't get any leakage going on. Clean it off, put your bleeder cap back on. Alright, so now the last thing we're going to do, we'll check the master cylinder to make sure that we're full on brake fluid. then we'll be good to go. Okay, now we'll come back and check to make sure that our fluid level is filled on the master cylinder. So now we can go ahead, put the cap back on, click it into place. If you're below the max line, make sure you fill it up to your max line. Now the last thing we have to do, we'll come pump the brake pedal. You should have resistance. As you can see, when I push on it, it does not go all the way to the back. Let's get a different angle for you here. You can see the amount of space there. Just as if you're pushing on the brakes normally. That means all of the air is out, all the calipers, the O-rings on the calipers are where they should be in place. No air in the brake line system. When you push on that brake, it should give maximum resistance and should not go all the way back. If it still keeps going all the way back, you either have more air in the line or you have a whole different set of issues going on with a leak somewhere. So, with that, hope that helped.